Hey there, welcome back everybody to the Dev Marketer channel. We are finishing our series on Laravel 5.4's new features. This is going to be the last section of this series, the last part, and it is going to be part number 9. And in this video, we're going to talk about Eloquent events. And they're pretty basic, I guess, but I'm going to go through, actually set up an event system for you guys, show you guys how it works, how we tie them to the events, and how you might want to use them. Now, the event system is obviously nothing new, but I will go through the basics on how to set it up if you are unfamiliar with it. But what's definitely new, in fact, actually, Eloquent events is somewhat new as well. Being able to tie Eloquent events is not new, is what I meant to say. Eloquent events were in 5.2, 5.3. They were in earlier versions. What's new in this is actually that we can tie Eloquent events now to our event classes that we create using the event service provider and stuff like that. So that's actually what's new, and I want to show you guys how you might use that because it's actually something that's going to be very, very handy, and I'm really glad we have this functionality in Laravel. So for this tutorial, what we'll be doing, the actual project that we'll be working on, is we're actually going to take the email that we created in the last video. If you want to go back and look at it, the links for that previous video are in the description. But we're going to go back to the email that we created in the last video. It was a welcome email to welcome a new user to our app. And we're going to set that up to trigger, instead of when we press a button, it's going to trigger automatically when a new user is created. So we're going to tie into that Eloquent event for the created event. So whenever a new user is created for that model, it's going to trigger a created event, and when that triggers, we're then going to process that email using events and listeners to send a welcome email to the user. So it's going to be pretty cool, and this is like a real world application that you would probably be doing. This would make sense to do in almost every application. So I thought I'd show you guys this. It kind of shows how to use mailables a little bit more, go into a little more detail on those, and it's also going to show you how to use events and the new Eloquent events, tying them to our existing events. Okay, so I'm going to be opening up the project we did in the last video, Dusk. Again, it's a basic. We haven't really customized this much other than our mailable. Otherwise, it's just a basic authentication Laravel application. Okay, the first thing we need to do to get started with this, to set up our events, is to go to our event service provider. So let's head on over there. Under App and Providers, you can find the Event Service Provider. In the Event Service Provider, this is where we define all of our events and all of our listeners, and basically which events trigger which listeners. This is basically the logic behind our events system. So if you've never been in here, this is basically all there is this is the most important part right here. And what this does is this defines basically all of our events, which are, the indexes of this associated array. And then the value for each of those is going to be the listeners. And you can have multiple listeners per event. So think about events as like a trigger and an action. Events are basically your trigger. So you can fire an event, which is basically a trigger that causes any listeners to occur. And listeners are basically actions. So every listener is going to be basically one specific action. So usually, a lot of times you'll have a 1-to-1 ratio. You'll have one event to one listener. Other times you'll have maybe multiple listeners to one event. So that way you only have to trigger the one event that, say, like a new user was created. That's an event that occurs. And you might do multiple things when a new user is created. So those are multiple listeners. An example might be to send the welcome email like we're going to do. And then maybe you want to send a Slack notification to your company so that everyone in the company knows you have a new user or something. So that would be 2 different listeners. One would be your Slack event or Slack notification, and one would be your mail, your email to the user. Okay, so that's basically what you're doing here. And inside of this event service provider, we define our events, we define our listeners, and then we'll go over to our terminal and we'll tell it to generate everything based off of this array. And so this is very similar to migrations in a way where you basically define everything here in the service provider. Just like you did with migrations, you would define what you want the tables to be, and then you would use the migrations to basically put them into action to actually execute them onto the table. That's kind of the similar concept here. We're going to create this, we're going to tell it to generate, and then it's actually going to go create the files for us. You'll see how it works. Let's do it. So for our event, we're going to create a new user created event. All right, so we're just going to call it new user. This means a new user was created. And then for our listener, what we're going to do is we're going to call it send welcome email. All right, so it's self-explanatory. That's what this listener is going to do, is it's going to send a new welcome email, and it's going to happen when a new user is created, when that new user event is triggered. So now that we have all of that created, again, if you want more, you could just keep creating multiple listeners down here, but we don't need to. So we're going to go ahead and save this event listener, is Event Service Provider, go back to our terminal, and we're going to now generate what we set up in there. So we created an event, we created a listener. We're going to use terminal now to generate them. So PHP artisan event generate, generate like that. Events and listeners generated, perfect. And now we can come back over here and we can find a new folder for events where we have our new user event, the one we just created. And then into listeners, we have our send welcome email listener, right? Pretty simple. So in the new user email, there's not really much we have to do inside of here. This actually by default, you can just usually leave it alone. There is one thing we're going to do, and that's because we actually want to, in the case of a new user, a new event occurring, we want to take that user object that defines the user that was just created, and we're going to want to define that inside of this event so that it gets passed to all the listeners. And that way, in our email, we can kind of customize it around all the information for the user that's created, all right? So let's go ahead and define that here. Otherwise, we don't really need to do anything in here if you weren't going to do that part. So let's create a, let's see, we're going to tie it to the user object. So let's say use app user, like that. And then we're going to create a public property here, public, and it's going to be called user. And that way it's going to be available to our listeners. Then let's go ahead and just set that property here. So we will type hint it here with user. So we can do that because we've imported it up here. And then let's go ahead and define it. So we'll say this user equals user. All right. So we're setting this public property equal to what's being imported over here. Okay. So there we go. So that should be all set up. That's basically everything we need to do. If you were broadcasting on a channel, you could set that up here if you wanted, but we're not going to worry about it. So that's all we need to do for our events. Now let's head over to our listeners. By default, that event's going to trigger this listener. So in this listener is where we can define our, basically what we want to happen when the event's triggered. It's going to execute the listener. What do we want the listener to do? Well, we want it to send that welcome email. We already set that email up, remember, in the last video using Mailable. So now we actually want to trigger it in the case of the event. So let's go ahead and set that up here. We're just going to use mail just like we did in the last video under the controller, which means we need to bring in our mail facade. And then we're also going to want to import the actual Mailable. So we'll use app mail and then the name of the mail. So right here, we're importing this file. So new user welcome. Yep, new user welcome, and that's all we need to do. And then down here in the handle, this is where you actually perform the functions. We're going to tell it to mail. So we're going to say mail to, and we're going to mail it to the user that was just created. Okay, so he sets up a new account. We want that person that just set up the account to get the email. Now, because in the last, we just barely set up in our event, remember we set up this public user property. So now we should have access to that. It's passed in to the listener in the event object. Okay, so now over here in the listener, you can see that we get this event object in our handler. And so now as a property of the event object is the user object. So we're going to say to event user, and then we want the email from the user, okay? So that's where we're going to get that email for the user that just signed up. It'll be passed in over here, available in this property, and then we're going to get the email for him. And then we're going to send it, and just like before, we're going to send it to a new, and then new user welcome, mailable. Again, it comes from right here. And then we're going to want to pass in the user object. So we're going to pass in event user so that we can have access to it in our mailable because we want to customize the email, remember? So we didn't customize the email in the last video, so I'll show you guys how to do that with mailables, but we need to, in order to customize it, we need to have that user object, and so that's what we're passing in here. We're passing in the user object, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. That's all you need to do for your listener. And now the listener is going to trigger this mail new user welcome, right? This new mailable. Okay, so now inside of our new user mailable, this is our mailable class. You can see that it triggers our markdown email, the one we created in the last video. The only thing that's going to be that we need to change here is we need to make sure that this email that we have, this email file, has access to the user object that we just passed in through the listener. Okay, so we keep passing this object through. We need to make sure that the mailable has access to it. So in order to do that, we're going to do it the same way we did in the listener. Just go ahead and define it up here. So we do use app user, and then just so we have access to it, let's go ahead and define a public property. So public user. And then, so keep in mind, whenever you have a public property in your mailable, any public property will be passed into your emails. Protected properties need to be manually passed in, but if you have a public property, all the public properties will be available in your view. So we're just going to make this a public property, and then we're going to go ahead and define it down here. So once again, we'll type hint it as user. We're going to pass it in as user. Remember, we already passed it in, so that event user, remember that object we passed into the mailable? So it's coming in under user. We're type hinting it to the user model up here, and then now we just need to define it. So we say this user equals, so we're defining this public property now equal to the property that just came in, or the object. Okay, so equals user, pretty easy. And now that we have all that defined, this public property will be available in our email. So in this email right here. So let's go ahead, and this is set up. Let's take a look and just customize our email real quick. We can do that in our view file. So resources views, email users, new user welcome. We set this up in the last video, but let's just go ahead and customize it. So instead of saying welcome to Dusk App, why don't we say welcome and then give it the user's name that just signed up. So we'll say welcome, and then we'll say user name. Okay, because we have access to this because it was a public property. We really appreciate it, blah, 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 blah. This is good. If you wanted, you could like customize the URL to the user, the user's profile page or something. You could do all that. This is just basic Blade, so you guys know how to do all that. What we'll do here, just to get creative, is let's add a component, and it will be called mail mail panel. This creates a nice little box that we can put something in. The email address you signed up with is, and then we'll give it the email address, okay? So user email, just so that we can show that these are getting output through our project and that we can customize it. That's kind of what I want to show you guys. Okay, so here we go. We went ahead and saved this. So we basically done everything that we need for the most part, except now we haven't tied our Eloquent event to the new user event class that we made. But we've done everything else. Once our new user event is triggered, okay, it triggers the send welcome email listener right here. The listener then sends the email using the mailable. The mailable is this. The mailable then gets the user object, makes it a public property of the mailable, and then renders the markdown for that view file. Then the view file then uses the user object to customize it and send the email. So we've done everything except we haven't tied the Eloquent event to our custom event class, and that's what we need to do. That's the last part. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and we're just going to do that inside of the model that we want to use. So in this case, it's the user model. All this is because a new user is getting created. And so remember that every model has its own events, these own Eloquent events. There's an event for created, for updated, for deleted, for restored. What else am I missing? Updated, created, stored. There might be a couple. I'll have the documentation linked below so you can find them all. And then each of those events also has like a pre-event. So like for created triggers after the object's been created in the database. And then there's creating, which is triggered before it actually saves it into the database. So you have creating and created. You have updating and updated. And those, again, link the same way. So updating triggers right before it goes to update it and actually save it in the database. Updated is right after it saved it. Deleting and deleted. So you have that method for class. I'll have all of them in the documentation, though, which you'll find the documentation linked down below. So now in order to actually set up those links between all these events, because right now all these events, they're all triggered, but they don't do anything. And so in order to actually link them to our classes that we've made, our event classes, we need to do it in the model. So what we'll do here is we'll create a new protected property, and it's going to be called events. Like that. And just like the one above it, you can see we just create an array. And here is where we tie all the different events together. So in our case, we only want to do it when a new user is created. Now, if you update or edit the user, it's going to not trigger the created event. It's going to trigger the updated event or the saved event, but not that's the other one I was missing, by the way, saved and saving. But anyway, it's going to trigger updated or updating, and it's going to trigger saved and saving, but it's not going to trigger the created or creating, because those are only when you first create a brand new item. Okay, so a brand new item user, basically. So we want to do created because that's only when a new one is created. And then we're going to link created to our event up to this right here, so the new user event. So what we're going to do, we're in our namespace, the app namespace. So what we need to do is say event, and then or events. I'm sorry, events, and then new user, and then do the class. Oh, and we don't need this in. You don't need it in a string. Okay, so just like that. So created links to the events new user class, and of course you could do more. So if you wanted when it's updated or something, you could link it to a different event or the same event, whatever you want to do. And you can have as many of those as you want. We only need one though. So that's it. And then make sure we get the semicolon down here, and we should be good. Let's go ahead and save that, and we're done. All right, so now it's set up. When this user model, when a new object is created, it's going to trigger this created event, which then links to the new user class, which is over here, and it goes down the process. It triggers the listener, triggers the mailer, and then it actually renders and sends the email. So let's go ahead and try that real quick. Let's go to our browser. All right, let's go ahead and access dusk.dev. We're going to go ahead and actually register a new user now. So we're going to click register. And then we're going to create a new user. So let's go ahead and do it. We're going to call it John Doe. If I could type. Our email address, again, doesn't really matter, but we'll just set it up. So john@doe.com. The password, 123456, 123456. And let's go ahead and register a new user. So it's going to, and it will take a second to run because it's triggering this event and the email, which all takes time. If you're in a production, you wouldn't want to do any of this. You're actually going to want to queue your email instead of waiting for it to send. So that's a bad way to run it. But normally what you do is the events are fine. You would just, you'd probably queue your listener and then queue your email. You just queue your listener, I guess. You don't have to queue the email at that point because the listener's already been queued. So then when the listener has time to run, when it gets up to the top of the queue, it's going to run, and then your mail would just run as part of that. So that's what you would normally want to do. Okay, now we've logged in. We're a new user. We have access to John Doe, as you can see here. So we would expect now to have a new email welcoming us to the app. So let's go and take a look at this. We used Mailtrap, if you remember. So we should go to Mailtrap, and we should see the email there. So let's log in. And then you can see we have a new email message in this markdown mail box. Here it is, new user welcome. Let's click it. And you can see welcome John Doe. So it pulled in the name that we created. And then it says your email address you signed up is john@doe.com. Remember, we set that up. Here's a perfect example, by the way, of a panel. And here we go. We got a welcome email. And that's it. That shows you guys how to tie these events into mail or into anything else. You could obviously do anything. But we went ahead and we tied our Eloquent events to our event classes that we can create using Laravel and got it all set up. So now we don't really need to do anything else. Because of that event and that listener, every time a new user is created, it's going to send them a welcome email, which I think is awesome. I think it's really cool. And this is something that you guys could actually implement into almost any of your applications that you're doing. This is functionality that's useful in almost every app. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Okay, that puts an end and wraps up our series on all the new features in Laravel 5.4. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the ride. Hopefully you guys did enjoy it. I was actually surprised that the interest in this series actually kind of waned off a little bit as it went on. So I don't know if everyone was just getting bored or if you guys have already seen this or you went somewhere else to see it. But anyway, the series is done with this video. We have explored all the new features, and I hope you guys can implement some of these new features into your apps, after you upgrade them to 5.4 or you start building new ones. So that's a wrap on this series. In the series that's coming up, we're going to go back and actually finish our devmarketer.io website. This is the series I started a while ago before I got super busy with work. We're going to go through and finish it and everything like that. So I'm really, really excited about all the support that you guys have given me, and I hope to see you guys in that series. Look for that coming up. Probably tomorrow will be the next episode. I'm trying to get these up. I'm trying to do like 4 or 5 videos a week lately. What I basically have gone to doing is I've actually gone to putting 20% of my time aside now, and I'm actually allotting that into my calendar. So 20% of my time is actually going to the channel now, which is something I haven't been doing in the past. I've been doing it as I have free time. So this is something new I'm trying, and so you should see a lot more videos more often now because of this. So with this series, we were able to do one video a day for a week. So that was pretty cool. So we've done, in the course of 1 week, in 7 days, we did 8 videos. Well, now it's 8 days because this will go up tomorrow. So 8 days, 8 videos, 1 a day. I think that was pretty good. I like how that worked out. We won't always do 1 video a day, but at least for this series, I knew we just had to kind of get it done because I knew the people would get bored about it over time. So anyway, I'll see you guys in the next video. We're going to tie a lot with events, and some of the intermediate functionality of Laravel is going to go on in the devmarketer.io series. So make sure to subscribe so you get those updates as they come in. And if you guys have any questions, hit me up on Twitter. You can email me, whatever's better for you guys. My email address is hello@jacurtis.com. Again, it's hello@jacurtis.com. It's all in the description. If you missed some of this series, you can also, the playlist is down in the description as well. And you can also tweet me at _JACurtis, okay? So I'll talk to you guys soon. I hope you guys had a good one. I'll see you in the next video.